Greetings, Emmett here from Reading for Wisdom. Newspeak, doublethink, the thought police, Big Brother. These were all terms introduced to us 70 years ago this month, introduced in one of the most chilling and some would say prophetic works of the 20th century. That work, published in May 1949, is the thrilling, the ghastly, the frightening, the relentlessly brutal, the depressing 1984 by George Orwell. George Orwell, in my opinion, one of the great writers of the 20th century, one of the great British journalists, and a person of great political conviction, a democratic socialist, as he said himself, from his experience in the Spanish Civil War from sort of 1936 onwards. He devoted his life, his writing, to the fight against totalitarianism, the totalitarianism of the Nazis, but especially the totalitarianism of communism. 1984 was his last work. He wrote it when he was gravely ill. He wrote it in a cottage on the Isle of Jura while he was suffering tuberculosis, and suffering indeed he did. This was a man who really knew that he had to get one last message out to the people. So 1984, many of us are familiar with the plot. Effectively, it's set in Oceania in the years after a great war, and we can see that great war being the Second World War, and an aftermath when great forces collided and what we assume from the work to be nuclear war has laid waste to large parts of the world, and the world has come together into three huge empires: Eurasia, Oceania, and East Asia. And these great empires are ruled by totalitarian regimes. Oceania, the book where the empire where the book is set, is ruled by Ingsoc. That's the English Socialist Party, and they're the people who take over after a big civil war has been won, and they institute a totalitarian regime led by the eponymous Big Brother. And life under this regime is brutal. And we start off the book by meeting Winston Smith. Winston Smith is the protagonist, and he is a lowly drone within the Ingsoc party, the outer party, which is about 13% or so of the population of Oceania, and these are the hacks, the party hacks. And Winston Smith's job, he works for the Ministry of Truth, which is of course the big propaganda department. And Winston Smith spends his whole time changing the past, changing news stories, altering photographs, rewriting texts, and effectively this propaganda sets a scene really where there's a sense of irreality throughout the book. What is the truth? Because the party controls the past, the party controls people's minds, how they speak, and it really is a brutal scene. Winston Smith, though, inside, even though he and his fellow workers are monitored 24 hours a day by the party, especially through these television screens, that the telescreens that sit in every place of work, that sit in the flat, the place you live in, constantly watching you. Big Brother is watching you. That's the message, one of the phrases that comes throughout. But Winston Smith starts rebelling against the party, rebelling internally, having lots and lots of doubts about what the truth is, what the future could be. And in a number of threads in the story, first of all, he comes across the writings of one of the rebels that the party keeps talking about, trying to undermine the sort of Oceania and the party system. And in reading these writings, he starts sort of having rebellious thoughts. Also, he begins an illicit love affair with Julia. And Julia is a fellow worker at the ministry, and they have this illicit affair. Eventually what happens is both of them are captured by the party. Unbeknownst to them, a lot of the people who are sitting around them, particularly one of the shopkeepers who originally sold Winston Smith the book, and where the Julia and Winston have been having their love affair, turns out that he was a party agent all along. Winston and Julia are taken into the Ministry of Love, and the Ministry of Love is where torture and the basest treatment of prisoners occurs. They are tortured in a dreadful way, and Winston Smith is effectively broken, destroyed, broken down as a human being, under the watchful eye of one of the top party officials, O'Brien, a very interesting character that we come across. So this is a book. Throughout its narrative, every page there is a depressing brutality. As is said in the book, it's almost like a jackboot stamping on your face repeatedly. And the message that Orwell was really trying to get across was he was trying to say, this is where totalitarianism goes. It controls the way you speak, it controls your mind, it controls your life, it controls your everything. The party is everything, and once the party is everything, then our humanity is lost. Now, we could ask a question, and this has been posed quite a lot recently, is how much did Orwell get right? Was his dystopian vision way too dystopian? And how does it compare with some of the other great dystopian works of the period, namely Aldous Huxley's Brave New World that was published in the mid-1930s? Well, I think Orwell got a heck of a lot of things right. First of all, in his vision of the telescreen, this all-watching eye. Of course, all we need to think about is our own computers, our own cell phones, smartphones, where effectively everything we do online, in fact, a lot of what we do offline, is being recorded, it's being monitored. Now, mainly by private companies and mainly for profit. But hey, we can see where this is going. And things like Facebook and Alexa and the way Amazon work and the way we can see the internet and the internet firewall and some of the social credit systems coming into play in places like China, you could almost think, my gosh, we are getting there in a technologically enabled way that a state, or certainly big world global actors, can watch us and know our every move. And through our interaction on social media, of course, what we say. And another thing that Orwell certainly got right was in, and we can see it all around us today, where he talked about, thought crimes, where he predicted how speech would be regulated. Well, all we have to look at is the shall we say, persecution of people online for having wrong ideas, for saying the wrong thing, political correctness and how it's employed to change the way we speak, to change the way we think. He also got something right in effect about, and very much like Aldous Huxley did, about the proletariat, about a vast range of people all across our world who are quite happy just to consume and really don't care about politics, don't care about voting. There's almost an apathy. As long as there's food and drink and sex and a bit of mindless pleasure, people are happy. And that's much the same here in 1984. In the book that Orwell sets out, the proletariat are the majority of the population. They're about 86% of the population of Oceania, for example, and Big Brother doesn't watch them. because Big Brother doesn't need to watch them. They're quite content as long as they're fed and kept happy. Interesting scenes in the book to see how Winston Smith interacts with the proletariat and finds their life strange and a bit repellent, but in some ways envies them. And there's certainly an aspect of the book, and this certainly comes from Orwell's experience of Stalinism, of communism. And it's the idea in here of the brotherhood. And the brotherhood are the elite, the 1% of Oceania, the 1% of the party who live it up, live it rich. They are the central core, they control everything. And really, all the control is about them. It's about their enrichment. It's about them, their ideas, the totality of them. And the figure of O'Brien that we come across, Winston initially thinks that this guy is maybe a bit of a rebel himself. So he opens himself to O'Brien. Of course, O'Brien is right at the centre of the party. And O'Brien is a truly frightening creature. One of the best portrayals on screen of O'Brien was in the 1984 movie where John Hurt stars as Winston Smith, and we have the incomparable Richard Burton as O'Brien. Chilling portrayal and very true to the book. Let's come to a scene, one of the torture scenes, where Winston Smith has already been in the Ministry of Love, enduring awful torments for, who knows, days, weeks, months. And he has an interaction with O'Brien that reveals the totalitarian mindset. "Do you know where you are, Winston?" he said. "I don't know. I can guess. In the Ministry of Love? Do you know how long you have been here?" "I don't know. Days, weeks, months. I think it's months." "And why do you imagine that we bring people to this place?" "To make them confess." "No, that is not the reason. Try again." To punish them?" "No," exclaimed O'Brien. His voice had changed extraordinarily, and his face had suddenly become both stern and animated. "No, not merely to extract your confession, not to punish you. Shall I tell you why we have brought you here? To cure you, to make you sane. Will you understand, Winston, that no one whom we bring to this place ever leaves our hands uncured? We are not interested in those stupid crimes that you have committed. The party is not interested in the overt act. The thought is all we care about. We do not merely destroy our enemies, we change them. Do you understand what I mean by that?" He was bending over Winston. His face looked enormous because of its nearness, and was hideously ugly because it was seen from below. Moreover, it was filled with a sort of exaltation, a lunatic intensity. Again, Winston's heart shrank. If it had been possible, he would have cowered deeper into the bed. He felt certain that O'Brien was about to twist the dial out of sheer wantonness. At this moment, however, O'Brien turned away. He took a pace or two up and down, then he continued less vehemently. "The first thing for you to understand is that in this place there are no martyrdoms. You have read of the religious persecutions of the past. In the Middle Ages there was the Inquisition. It was a failure. It set out to eradicate heresy and ended up perpetuating it. For every heretic it burned at the stake, thousands of others rose up. Why was that? Because the Inquisition killed its enemies in the open and killed them while they were still unrepentant. In fact, it killed them because they were unrepentant. Men were dying because they would not abandon their true beliefs. Naturally, all the glory belonged to the victim and all the shame to the inquisitor who burned him. Later, in the 20th century, there were the totalitarians, as they were called. There were the German Nazis and the Russian communists. The Russians persecuted heresy more cruelly than the Inquisition had done, and they imagined that they had learnt from the mistakes of the past. They knew, at any rate, that one must not take martyrs. Before they exposed their victims to public trial, they deliberately set themselves to destroy their dignity. They wore them down by torture and solitude until they were despicable, cringing wretches, confessing whatever was put into their mouths, covering themselves with abuse, accusing and sheltering behind one another, whimpering for mercy. And yet, after only a few years, the same thing had happened over again. The dead men had become martyrs, and their degradation was forgotten. Once again, why was it? In the first place, because the confessions that they made were obviously extorted and untrue. We do not make mistakes of that kind. All the confessions that are uttered here are true. We make them true. And above all, we do not allow the dead to rise up against us. You must stop imagining that posterity will vindicate you. Winston, prosperity will never hear of you. You will be lifted clean out from the stream of history. We shall turn you into gas and pour you into the stratosphere. Nothing will remain of you, not a name in a register, not a memory in a living brain. You will be annihilated in the past as well as in the future. You will never have existed. What a brutal passage, and we could just quote that book, but I think it's better for you to go and read it in its entirety. O'Brien is a frightening character. He is the embodiment of the totalitarian. The totalitarian mind is the mind of O'Brien. And gosh, the ending to 1984 is a bleak one. It's a bleak one for the character of Winston. It's a bleak one for Julia. It's a bleak one for humanity, because Orwell has, in this book, really portrayed something that can happen, that could happen, that maybe is happening, and it's happening to greater degrees depending on where you live in the world. And of course, what 1984 though is a weapon. It's Orwell's great weapon against totalitarianism, because totalitarianism can only win if our minds are closed, if our mouths are shut, if our ears are shut. And reading books like this, you start to recognize these techniques, you start to understand them, and with that you can fight. You can fight for freedom of speech, you can fight for freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and for the continuation of true democratic ideals. And those are the things that George Orwell stood for, and he stood for them all his life. We're going to do some more programs in the future on George Orwell. He's such a rich author, and in his own lifetime, not really liked by the people on the right. They didn't trust him because he was a socialist. Not really liked by socialists because they saw that he had betrayed the true cause. So, fascinating character. 1984, his last work, as I said, essential reading. Today, never more than at any other time in history. So, a big shout out to all our current subscribers. Thanks for your support, guys and gals. And look, to the rest of you who are viewing, we hope you like the program. Hope you like the new format. Hope you like the books that we're reading and reviewing. We've got many, many more to come in the months ahead. Please do subscribe, give us a like, and come over to ReadingforWisdom.com, where we've got much more stuff to entertain you. See you next time.